I can bet when you were young, you probably grew up on a healthy diet of nice fairy tale stories, where the prince gets the princess, the good guys win, and there's all sunshine and rainbows. But the reality of many of these classic fairy tale stories are actually much more sinister than perhaps you may realise. If you don't like your childhood getting ruined, then maybe today you might want to skip this Brainspill video. Hello! Welcome to Brainspill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and today we are talking about the classic renditions of the fairy tale stories you know and love. You will probably know them from some more popular companies and properties, Disney. But you know what? The original stories where these came from are pretty dark. Our story starts today with two German brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Two brothers that were strangely fascinated with German folklore stories. So fascinated, in fact, that they decided to start collecting folk tales around their growing fascination of German folklore. Their first collection of folk tales, Children's and Household Tales, began publication in 1812. This first edition contained 86 stories that the brothers had managed to gather, but quickly grew as the pair gathered more and more unique fairy tale stories, with the 7th edition eventually having a whopping 210 unique stories. Oh boy, and let me tell you this, these tales are definitely pre-Disney, so if for whatever reason you're sat with your child watching this right now, all I'm going to suggest is maybe put them to bed now. This is probably not the video for the little ones. And if you completely ignore that request like the responsible adult you are, then I hope your children love death and destruction, because that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this video. Anyway, let's start with the cult classic Snow White. One of the most well-known fairy tales of all time, made most well-known for Disney's 1937 animated version of the movie. However, the original source material would never, ever be made into a Disney movie. In the original Disney animated version of Snow White, it is considered that Snow White is the fairest of them all, to which that witch doesn't like, and hires the huntsman to go and kill Snow White. So she asks him to collect her heart and bring it back as proof, which is a very odd request, but fair enough. Being given this very grisly task, he simply can't do it, and warns Snow White, in which she escapes into the forest. In the Grimm tale of the Snow White story, the Queen says the following: "Take Snow White out into the woods. I never want to see her again. Kill her, and as proof that she is dead, bring her lungs and liver back to me." I don't know why specifically she wants these things, but the huntsman in this story as well is also not a complete savage, so he decides to return the lungs and liver of a boar that he kills instead, which the Queen assumes is Snow White. She then proceeds to slow cook the liver and lungs and eats them. Yeah, this is the lungs and liver of what she's presumed was Snow White. Yeah, Disney would never air that. In this story, Snow White goes and lives with the 7 dwarves, much like the story that most of us know. The Queen would soon discover through the magic mirror that Snow White never actually died and that she still lives, so she had to resort to Plan B, which, as you might imagine, is just as grisly as the first time that she tried to kill and eat her. And because the magic mirror never lies, she knew that Snow White was still out there. So the Queen decided to go and dress up in disguise as an old peddler woman, armed with the most powerful weapon she had, a bodice lace, which she used to strangle and suffocate Snow White. Yeah, that was pretty direct and to the point. I mean, the whole poison apple seemed a little bit far-fetched anyway. Why not just choke her out? Choke that bitch out. It's the easiest way to get rid of it. Look, I always say that if you want something doing properly, do it yourself. However, the dwarves find Snow White and are able to free her in time. Therefore, the Queen has taken 2 L's in the space of the same paragraph. Therefore, the Queen emboldens her plan by further poisoning a comb and putting it on Snow White's head, knocking her out yet again. You'd think at this point that she'd just leave. You know, she must know that this person is out to get her, so why is she hanging around? Well, as you might imagine, the dwarves find her and remove the comb off her head in order to prevent her from continuing to be poisoned. The dwarves yet again suspected that it was her evil stepmother and removed the comb and bringing her around, warning her to be careful not to let anybody else in. I don't know why you need 7 dwarves to tell you that, you'd think you'd be able to pick that up yourself, but there we are. So, what does she do? She then decides to accept a poisoned apple from the old hag. You know, the same hag that just tried to strangle her and place a poisoned comb in her hair. All I'm saying is that fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times and Snow White gets exactly what's coming to her. When the dwarves came round that evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground. She was not breathing at all. She was dead. They lifted her up and looked for something poisonous. They tried to water her down with water and wine, but nothing worked. They realised that this time she had well and truly died. For realsies this time. So they decided to place her in a glass coffin due to the fact that they couldn't bury her in black earth. With the swaths of forest creatures coming to pay their respects, this is pretty much the same as what happened in the Snow White version that Disney made. So yeah, this part is pretty similar to that of the Disney version that we all know and love, but then things take another odd turn, and arguably this is the strangest of them all. Prepare yourselves, people. You know in the story that the fantastic prince comes and manages to give her a kiss and wake her up? Well, the prince does come and he finds this beautiful lady in this glass coffin, and he asks the dwarves to see if he can buy her. Yeah, she's dead at this point, wants to buy a corpse of a woman that he's never met, claiming that he's fallen in love with her. The dwarves, seemingly having some sense of morality and thinking that this guy is bad vibes and bad juju, say no and decide to tell him to go do one. But the prince insisted, having clearly fallen for this lady. The dwarves then pitied the man, the guy they've never met before, and decided to simply just give her to him. The servants of the prince started to carry the glass coffin, but one tripped. Yes, they tripped, and because of the jostling of the glass coffin, the piece of apple that was poisoned and still inside her throat came out, which instantly brought her around. So she actually wasn't dead, probably just knocked out by a lodged piece of poisoned apple. So yes, Snow White was awake, and she was surrounded by her dwarf friends and a creepy necrophiliac. She instantly agrees to marry the man, bearing in mind that she's never met him before, which is pretty strange in itself, but that's not the end of it, because this whole thing is pretty much some genius sweet-ass revenge plot against the stepmother. Because Snow White decided to invite her to the wedding, but terrorised her by uttering a curse to make her paralysed and frightened when she entered the wedding venue. They then placed a pair of iron shoes into burning coals and then made her dance on them until she fell down dead. And that is the end of Snow White. Jesus Christ, what the hell were people writing in those days? I can sort of understand why Walt Disney decided to quite drastically change the story, not gonna lie. Another classic is Rapunzel, which of course many people know the story and know there's various different versions of it, but the premise is generally the same, that there is a fair princess in a tower with long hair, a heroic knight comes to save her, and the only way he can get up there is to climb her hair that she droops down off the tower, and then he climbs up and saves her. Pretty straightforward story. The original, however, is not anything like that. The Grimm version of the story ended a little bit differently. Rapunzel is pregnant, of all things, so the evil witch, upon discovering this, cuts off her long hair and releases her into the wild. Seems a bit different to the Tangled version, where the evil witch character wants her hair, but whatever. So, the knight comes around thinking that his princess is still in the tower, so he decides to climb it, somehow, almost like some sort of an Assassin's Creed thing, gets to the top, and the evil witch is there to curse him, in which he falls back out the tower and lands in a thorn bush. If you've seen how high those towers are, you'll know that that is a pretty mighty fall, and I'm surprised that he didn't break every single bone in his body. Well, it wasn't quite as bad as that. It was only the fact that when he fell on the thorn bush, 2 brambles went straight through his eyes and blinded him. Yep, this actually happened in Rapunzel. Well, the Grimm version of the story anyway. Pretty nasty turn of events, something which I'm pretty sure Disney would never get away with or even wish about putting in their story. Hence the decision to likely tune down the violent themes in their family-friendly movies. Whilst the story does end somewhat on a happy note, the prince does wander into the woods and eventually finds Rapunzel due to her singing, which is sweet but also pretty messed up at the same time. And that is just a couple stories which, I'm sure that you'll agree with me and probably scratch your head and ponder, who the hell wrote these things, and why do people have to be so gruesome about all these fairy tale stories? It just seems pretty unnecessary. If you like the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. As you can tell, with there being over 200 stories in this collection, and us covering the original stories of just 2, there is a lot to cover here, and we've only just scratched the surface on how horrendous some of these stories actually are. So if this is something of particular interest to you, let me know, because if you want to see more, I've got a fair few more stories that I could bring up, some of which are even weirder than the ones we've talked about today. But let me know, because this has actually been quite an interesting one to look into, and if you want me to do more, then you know what to do. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.